You can't keep it hidden out here forever. We just want to ensure public safety.
Would you dare save a creature the world calls a monster, knowing that doing so could cost you your life? In 1989, deep in the Selway Bitterroot Mountains of Idaho, Anna Doyle, a former nurse hiding from a past tragedy, broke the one sacred law of the forest. Never interfere with what the woods have bound. She heard something gasping in the silence. What she found wasn't a myth. It was real. A bleeding, captured Bigfoot, bound in military-grade rope, left to die slowly. She saved him, and from that moment on, both their lives were marked. But what if the fire that killed her sister wasn't an accident? What if someone wanted these creatures wiped out, and her sister died for discovering the truth? Now Mara must choose: bow to the humans who destroy in the name of order, or stand with the one being who showed her mercy. This is not just a survival story. It's a story of compassion that breaks ancient rules, of a bond between worlds never meant to meet, and of a woman who chose to protect what others called a monster. My dear viewer, where are you watching this from? What's your name, and how far can this story travel if we share it together? If this tale touched something in you, give it a like and subscribe to join a growing community that believes Bigfoot deserves more than myth. He deserves a voice. From the heart of the forest, we thank you for listening. The wind scraped across the ridgeline like a dull blade, slicing through the brittle hush of late autumn. No bird song, no rustle of branches, just a silence that felt too hollow, too still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Anna Doyle stood alone, one boot pressed against the frost-laced granite, the other shifting to adjust her weight on a slope she'd climbed 100 times before. Her coat, faded green canvas, patched at the shoulder, hung stiff from cold and memory. She scanned the woods below with narrowed eyes. Something was off. A silence this deep didn't come without reason. Not here, not in Selway Bitterroot. She crouched slowly, running her hand along the moss-damp earth. Broken twigs, compressed soil. She moved her fingers through a patch of churned-up leaves and found a smear of rust-colored blood, already drying into the dirt. Animal blood, maybe. But there was a pattern to the trail. Wide strides, deep impressions, broken branches 8 feet off the ground. Whatever it wasn't moving like prey. It was moving like something hunted. She adjusted the strap of the old canvas satchel across her chest and began walking. Not fast. Deliberate. The slope curved northward into darker woods, where the trees grew tighter, their trunks black with sap and shadow. 15 years in these mountains had taught her every trail, every old logging road, every scent carried on the wind. And yet today, the forest felt foreign. Nervous. Even the pines seemed to lean away from something. She saw it after the third bend in the trail, wedged between 2 downed trees, half covered in moss and pine needles. At first glance, it looked like a collapsed bear, though she knew better the moment her boots slid to a stop. Her breath caught. It was massive. Easily 8, maybe 9 feet tall if it were standing. Dark brown fur, thick and matted. Darker near the shoulders and back where it was soaked with blood. Rope bit deep into its wrists and ankles. Crude knots cinched hard and fast. Military style. She recognized them. She'd tied knots like that once, a long time ago, during medevac trainings in Montana when she still wore scrubs and carried morphine instead of flint and a hunting knife. The creature was breathing, shallow, rattling, eyes closed but flickering beneath the lids. Its chest trembled with each struggling inhale, muscles twitching from blood loss or hypothermia or both. Flies buzzed around the open wound on its side, where flesh had been torn wide enough to expose raw pink meat. Mara didn't speak. She didn't reach out right away either. She just watched. 15 years. 15 years of obeying the only law that mattered out here. Don't interfere with what the mountain has claimed. But that law had another side. A memory. A girl's scream swallowed by wildfire. A hand slipping from hers as the smoke thickened. Her sister. Gone. Because she ran in, thinking she could save her. That was the day the forest drew its line. And she'd never crossed it again. Not until now. Her knife came free with a soft shink, the steel flashing once in the gray light. She didn't make a sound as she slid the blade under the first knot. The rope frayed easily, snapping back with tension. The creature stirred. Its eyes opened, just barely. Dark, glassy, filled with confusion and something older than fear. Mara's hands moved fast, muscle memory taking over. She cut the second knot, then the third. The creature groaned, but it didn't lash out. It didn't bare teeth. It curled its fingers inward, almost like it was trying to shrink away from her. And then, with a sound that was barely audible, it turned its head aside, slowly, as if to keep from scaring her, and exposed the side of its throat. Not submission, not surrender, but something older, something almost human. She swallowed. The wind howled low between the trees, and she reached behind her, tugging her satchel forward. She unzipped it and pulled out an old jacket. Her sister's. The navy wool was too small for the creature, of course, but she draped it over its heaving chest anyway, careful not to press too hard on the wound. It twitched beneath her hand, but didn't stop her. She could feel the heat of its skin, feverish. And then, God help her, she saw it. The carving, on the tree trunk just behind its head. A symbol, not random, not just scratches. It was a curved arc intersecting with 3 diagonal lines. Her breath hitched. She'd seen it before, drawn in pencil in the back of a weathered notebook stained with smoke and tears. Her sister's journal. The last thing they found from her before the fire swallowed everything else. She turned slowly, gaze sweeping the tree line. Someone was watching. She didn't hear footsteps. She didn't see a shadow move. But she felt it, like a weight pressing between her shoulder blades. She stood up and let her hand hover just above her hunting knife, though she didn't draw it. Then the creature, no, not a creature, a being, moved. Its hand, large enough to crush a melon, lifted from the dirt and hovered close to hers. It didn't grab, just rested there, trembling, inches from her palm. She looked down, met its eyes that shimmered with something she hadn't expected, recognition, as if it remembered something she didn't. And then it closed its fingers into a fist and pulled its hand back, curling inward as though ashamed. Mara knelt again. She didn't speak, just pressed the back of her fingers lightly to its temple, like checking for fever, like she used to do on long ambulance rides when patients slipped under. The skin was hot, the pulse weak. She leaned down and whispered, not sure why. "You're gonna freeze to death if we stay here." But maybe that was meant more for her than it was for him. She stood, scanned the woods again. Still nothing, but the unease wasn't leaving. It was growing, like the trees themselves were holding back some breath they didn't want to release. She looped her arms beneath one of its thick shoulders, gritting her teeth. It was like trying to lift a soaked mattress, but inch by inch, she pulled him toward a game trail that led back toward her cabin, toward fire and water and warmth. The jacket slipped off his chest in the process, falling onto the moss. She paused, picked it up. When she looked back, her breath caught. A pair of eyes, human eyes, hidden in the brush, not moving, watching. Not afraid, just patient. She didn't call out, didn't react. Just lowered her gaze and kept moving, pulling the broken giant through the underbrush, her knees buckling under the strain. But her mind had already shifted. The law of the mountain had been broken. Not by him, by her. And the mountain never forgets. The fire crackled low in the old stone hearth, sending up thin wisps of smoke that vanished into the dark beams of the ceiling. Mara sat close, her knees pulled tight to her chest, one arm slung over her thigh as she watched the creature lie motionless on the rug, just inches from the flames. a shallow rise and fall of its chest. Steam lifting off the matted fur where snow had melted, mixing with blood and grime. She didn't know what it was. Not exactly, but she knew it wasn't a bear. She knew it wasn't just some story told in barrooms when the wind howled wrong through the valley. And she knew, in the deepest part of her bones, that this wasn't the first time one had come down from the ridges. It lay curled, large limbs tucked close, one hand twitching now and then as if reacting to dreams it couldn't shake. The coat she'd laid over him, her sister's, slid off one broad shoulder. She reached out and gently pulled it back into place, her fingers brushing fur that felt half dead from cold. Outside, the storm had thickened. The wind didn't just blow, it pushed, wrapped itself around the cabin like a warning, the kind of wind that dragged secrets out from under the earth. Mara stood slowly, stepping to the window. Sleet clung to the glass in hard diagonal lines. The forest was a shadowed smear beyond the frost. And then she saw it, a flicker, not of movement, of stillness. There was a man standing beneath the tree line. Not close, not yet, but there. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The fire behind her popped loudly, sending sparks up the flue, and she flinched. When she looked again, he was gone. But then, the knock. 3 hard raps at the door. No pause, no hesitation. She turned, heartbeat spiking, reached under the table for the old lever-action rifle and cocked it once. Not loaded. She just wanted whoever it was to hear it. Then she opened the door. Kane Mercer. He stood in the mist like someone pulled from a bad dream. Tall, clean boots, black parka zipped to the throat, silver at the temples, and that stare, like sheet metal left out in winter. Cold, unyielding. "Well," he said, voice soft, almost polite. "I figured it'd be you." Mara didn't answer. She stepped aside just slightly, not enough to welcome, not enough to block. Just enough for him to take that as a challenge. He stepped in anyway. Snow clung to his collar. The door shut behind him with a groan. His eyes found the creature immediately. He didn't flinch. He didn't curse. He just stared. "I thought maybe you were smarter than this," Kane said, not looking at her. "I thought you were dead," Mara replied. Kane smiled, thin, humorless. "You don't walk away from this mountain easy. You should know that better than most." The creature stirred slightly, groaning under its breath. Kane's hand twitched toward the shape under his coat. She knew it was a sidearm. "You're not killing it in my home," she said. Kane finally turned to face her. "You don't get to decide that. This isn't your forest." "No," he agreed. "But it isn't yours either. It belongs to the ones who marked it first. And that thing's crossed its boundary one too many times." Mara stared him down. "He was chained, bleeding out. You did that?" Kane tilted his head. "You think I'm the only one interested in what's living in these ridges? I'm just here to finish the story clean. But you just invited the whole damn book into your living room." She took a step closer. "You know what happened to my sister." "I know everything about your sister," Kane said. "She went looking for something she should have left alone. Same as you." His voice didn't rise, didn't fall. It just pressed in. The creature stirred again. His eyes opened, barely. He looked toward Mara, then toward Kane. No growl, no noise, but the way he stared, pleading, exhausted, broken, it made something old in her chest tremble. Kane noticed. "See that?" he said. "He knows. They always know. When the balance breaks, someone has to pay the debt." Mara's jaw clenched. Kane stepped past her, crouched beside the creature, close enough that the thing could have snapped his neck if it had the strength. "You should have stayed out of this," Kane whispered. The creature exhaled, shivering. Not from cold this time. From something deeper. Shame, maybe. Recognition. Kane stood up and glanced around the cabin. His eyes landed on the fireplace, on the framed photo beside it, her and her sister. He studied it for a long moment. "You still don't get it," he said. "That night the fire came down the ridge. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't lightning or carelessness. It was a correction. Mara's stomach turned. What do you mean? Kane didn't answer. He moved toward the door. But the mountain, he said, pausing with one hand on the knob. It already marked you once, and it never gives second chances. He opened the door. Cold swept in like a slap. Kane stepped outside and vanished into the mist. Mara stood there long after the wind shut the door behind him, long after the room warmed again. The creature let out a low sound. Not pain, not fear. Just something that didn't belong in words. Something that cracked in the middle like it had lived through too many winters alone. She sat beside him, resting her back against the cabin wall. The fire hissed. Her fingers found the edge of the coat again and tugged it higher over his shoulder. I don't know what you are, she said softly, but I don't think you're the monster. Outside, the storm thickened. The snow turned to sleet, then to something heavier, and somewhere in the trees beyond the ridge, a sound echoed. Low, rhythmic, not human. A call. She rose slowly, walked to the back window, and peered through the frost. Footprints, fresh ones, deep in the soil, leading from the forest to her home, and not just one set. She looked toward the trees, heart pounding. Then, just at the edge of the clearing, something moved. A dark shape, watching, waiting, but not approaching. She backed away from the window. The fire cracked louder. The wind howled like it was pulling voices through time. And in that moment, Mara Doyle understood something she hadn't dared admit when she cut that rope in the woods. Whatever she had pulled into her world wasn't coming alone. The snow came just after dusk, fine and silent, like ash from some distant fire falling back to earth. It dusted the cabin roof in soft white and curled along the edges of the window pane, trying to find a way in. The fire inside hissed low, half-starved, flickering along the edges of dry wood Mara had chopped herself 3 weeks ago. Her hands trembled now as they worked, not from cold, but from the weight of what she'd done. Riverback lay still on the floor, his breath shallow, head turned toward the dying flames. He hadn't moved in hours. Not since Kane's voice echoed through the storm. Not since Mara slammed the door shut and locked it with both hands like that would keep anything out, like it could keep the truth from sinking any deeper. She knelt beside him again, pushing a damp cloth into the basin, wringing it out, wiping dried blood from his shoulder. The wound along his ribs had stopped bleeding, but the skin was hot and angry, oozing a thin line of dark fluid. Infection was already taking hold. She'd seen it before, on hunters who got careless, on hikers who tried to outrun a storm and got caught on barbed wire or worse. He groaned, barely. The sound cut through her like the wind outside. Easy, she whispered, pressing a clean rag over the open skin. You're still here. He flinched. His hand twitched, and then something happened that stole her breath. He moved his other hand. Clumsy, slow, but not aimless. It reached up toward the bowl of water beside them. He didn't touch it. He just hovered, his long fingers curling slightly, like he'd seen her do it, and now he was mimicking the act, trying to understand. Then his hand dropped back, exhausted, but not before his eyes met hers. They weren't wild. They weren't animal. They were tired, and full of something old, something aware. Mara sat back slowly. The room was too quiet, too small. She stood up and walked to the shelf above her desk, fingers brushing past bottles, matchbooks, an old compass, until she found the leather-bound notebook. It had belonged to her sister. The cover was stained from years of damp. The spine cracked when she opened it. Page after page of sketches, bark patterns, bear tracks, cloud studies from ridgelines, notes about the change in tree sap consistency near the river bend. Her sister had always been the meticulous one, the patient one. Mara had been the rebel, the impulsive one, the one who ran into fire. And then she found it. A sketch, rough but unmistakable. A tall figure standing upright, covered in dark fur. Next to it, a symbol, an arc. intersected by 3 short slashes. She remembered that shape carved into the tree just before she found Riverback. Now it was in her sister's journal, drawn with care, dated 2 weeks before the fire that took her. She turned the page. Another sketch. This one was more detailed. A face. Not quite human. Not quite beast. Kind eyes. Deep lines etched in the forehead. The same fur pattern around the shoulders. Riverback. She was sure of it. She looked back at him. He was watching her. Not in fear, not in pain, but with recognition. He made a soft sound. Not quite a growl. More like a broken word pushed through a throat not made for speaking. And then, slowly, he lifted one hand and pointed, trembling, to the symbol in the book. Mara froze. "You know this," she whispered. He nodded. Just once. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't clean, but it was real. She stepped closer. Her voice was hoarse. "Did you know her?" He blinked slowly, his lips parting. A sound came, low and strained. It almost sounded like, "Ruth." She knelt, heart pounding, tears threatening. "Ruth!" He looked away. His body shuddered, and he let out a soft moan, burying his face against the floor. She didn't speak again, just sat beside him until the fire burned low. Later, she stepped out onto the porch. The wind had calmed, but the snow still fell, thicker now, blanketing everything in a hush that didn't feel peaceful. She looked down. Footprints, 3 sets, humanoid, heavy, leading up the path but veering off just shy of the tree line. She followed them with her eyes, heart hammering in her chest. Whoever they were, they'd come close. Watched, then moved on. A sharp beam of light sliced through the forest in the distance, white, thin, sweeping back and forth. Not the moon, not firelight, flashlights, military grade, or search gear. They were back. She turned quickly, shut the door, bolted it, and dropped the thick wooden brace across. Riverback stirred again. He was trying to rise, hands digging against the rug like he needed to stand, needed to leave. "No," she said, stepping to him. "You can't." But he was trying. His massive body tensed, legs pushing beneath him, ribs straining. He grunted, almost falling. She caught him as best she could. He was too heavy, too wide, but she wrapped her arms around his waist and steadied him anyway. He leaned against her. They stayed there, breathing hard, bodies pressed close. "You're not ready," she said, "and they're out there." He lifted his head, his eyes filled with a quiet desperation. Behind them, the fire flared, then dimmed. Mara helped him back down. This time, he didn't resist. She turned off the lanterns. Let the dark fill the cabin, moved carefully to the back window. The lights were moving closer now, between trees, swinging in rhythm. 3, maybe 4 figures, maybe more behind. A soft voice crackled outside. Radio. Or "Target still inside. No movement. Maintain position." Her breath stopped. They weren't just watching. They were circling. She turned back to the journal, flipped through more pages, found one with a sketched map. A trail Ruth had marked as uncertain, a dead-end path that had always seemed pointless. But Ruth had circled something, a gap between 2 rock formations, near the western slope. A way out, or maybe something else. Riverback was watching her again. She tore the page free, stuffed it in her pocket. Her fingers brushed the old hunting knife beside the stove. And then, just beyond the window, a voice she knew too well. "Night's almost over, Mara." Kane. The words came like breath on glass, calm, measured, as if he were just out there waiting for her to come to her senses. But she already had, and she wasn't going to let them take him. Not again. The storm came like a living thing, fast, blind, hungry. It chewed through the trees with reckless howls, snapped off weak branches, hurled gusts of snow in wild spirals that devoured the landscape. By the time Mara stepped out the back door with Riverback leaning heavy against her shoulder, the world was nothing but wind, shadow, and white. She didn't speak. Didn't have to. His body moved beside hers, one limp step at a time, breath wheezing in short bursts that steamed through the frozen air. He was still burning up with fever, still bleeding under the half-frozen bandages she'd wrapped with shaking hands. But he was walking, and that had to count for something. The trail she followed wasn't marked. Not anymore. It used to be a hunting route her father showed her when she was 12. Now it was just a jagged descent through tight pine, half-buried rocks, and slick patches of hard snow. They moved slow, silent. Every step a gamble. Behind them, somewhere above the ridge, voices were breaking the silence. Not loud, but confident, organized. 6 men, maybe more. Flashlights filtered between trees in the distance like blinking eyes, methodical and patient. No shouting, no panic. These men weren't searching. They were closing in, and Mara knew who was with them. Kane always came prepared. Not flashy, not loud, just effective. He moved like someone who understood the rules of pursuit. Never run, never announce, and never, ever underestimate the wounded. She gripped the edge of Riverback's fur and kept moving downhill, feet crunching through snow that no longer muffled sound. The storm made everything louder. The creak of their boots, the rasp of his breath, the hiss of wind tunneling through tree trunks. They reached a clearing ringed with dead stumps, sawdust frozen in place from some old illegal logging attempt decades back. She paused to catch her breath, then turned her head slightly. Listened. Nothing. Too quiet. Then a crack of ice to her left. Riverback spun, faster than she expected, dropping to one knee, one arm raised like a shield. Mara ducked instinctively behind a fallen log. A net flew from the trees, metal wires glinting in the flashlight beam, and struck the snow where Riverback had just stood. The weighted corners dug into the ground, anchoring it. A breath too late, and he would have been tangled. The trees exploded with movement. 3 men in snow gear emerged, rifles raised but not firing. They moved in a tight arc. Standard pincer. Kane's tactics. "Don't run," one of them called out. "We're not here to hurt you." Riverback let out a deep sound. Not a growl. Something older. It vibrated through Mara's ribs like a warning drum. The second net came from above. A launch trap. She didn't see the operator, but Riverback did. He leapt sideways, slammed his shoulder into Mara's ribs, knocking her down just as the steel mesh dropped onto the space where she'd stood. Pain bloomed in her side. Her vision blurred, but she rolled quickly, pressing her body flat against the earth. Riverback stood above her, chest heaving, limbs wide, defiant, and then he ran, not away from her, toward the men, straight into the line of fire. She scrambled up. "No!" But it was too late. He slammed into the first agent like a charging bull, knocking him into the air. The man's rifle flew from his hands, vanished into the dark. The second aimed and fired, but the bullet missed wide, cracking into bark. Riverback spun, grabbed the metal pole that held the third net trap, and snapped it in half with a single wrench of his arm. They weren't trying to kill him. Mara realized that with a sick twist in her stomach. They were trying to capture him alive. She turned and ran, back toward the lower ridge, toward the only hiding place she remembered from childhood, an old rock hollow barely wide enough to squeeze into. "Riverback!" she shouted behind her. "Come!" She didn't know if he understood. She just ran. Behind her she heard shouting, more gunshots, then nothing. The slope turned steeper. Her boots slipped. Snow crumbled under her. She grabbed a tree trunk, kept her balance, kept moving. Then a hand. Not Riverback's, a man's. It grabbed her coat from behind. She screamed, twisted, elbowed hard, and heard a grunt of pain. She turned, saw a face beneath a snow hood. Young, focused. He reached again. This time she pulled the hunting knife from her belt and slashed upward. Not to kill, just to scare. It worked. He stumbled back. She shoved him hard and ran again. The rocks appeared like ghosts, jagged teeth rising from the ground. She dove inside, scraping her knees, breathing hard. The hollow was tight, cold. but it curved inward and downward, a natural chimney. Riverback couldn't fit, but maybe he wouldn't have to. Seconds later, she heard heavy footsteps, not boots, bare feet, massive ones. He was coming. His shadow passed over the entrance, and then he dropped to all fours and pressed himself against the outside, watching, waiting, protecting. Flashlights danced on the snow nearby. Radio static hissed. "She's here!" No visual on the asset. "West team, circle low!" Mara held her breath. Riverback crouched, silent, completely still. 3 men passed the rocks, scanning, cursing under their breath. One stopped, looked directly toward them. Riverback didn't move. The man stepped closer. Mara tensed. Then, static. "Mercer, we've got movement north of you. Possible second target. Unconfirmed visual. Repeat, second target may be active." The man cursed and turned back into the trees. Riverback waited. So did Mara. Then, slowly, he reached one hand toward the entrance, fingers brushing the edge. She touched his wrist. Neither spoke. The storm softened. Not much, but enough. When they finally emerged, the woods were empty again. But only for now. They walked in silence through the snow. Past shattered nets. Past boot prints fading fast in fresh powder. Mara said nothing, but her mind was spinning. They'd said it. Target 2. Another one. Somewhere out there, another one was still free. She looked at Riverback. He looked ahead, toward the trees, and deeper. Snow still clung to the folds of Mara's jacket, but the cold no longer felt external. It lived in her now, beneath the skin, in the hollow of her chest where memory had built its shrine. The forest was behind them, at least the part of it that knew her name. What lay ahead was different, older, not just hidden, but forgotten, like a page folded out of the book of the world and sealed shut by time. Riverback walked in silence, but his shoulders carried the tension of instinct. His steps slowed at every strange shadow. His nose lifted to sense Mara couldn't begin to read. He was guiding her, but not with confidence. With reverence, like he'd only heard stories of what waited beyond the ridgeline, but had never seen it with his own eyes. The entrance revealed itself the way ancient things do, not with grandeur, but with patience. A half-buried stone arch at the base of the cliff, moss growing over its lip. The earth around it damp and sunken as if softened by the breath of something vast beneath. The wind didn't enter here. It only circled and stopped, as if the mountain held its own lungs just outside the mouth. Riverback placed one hand against the stone, his fingers splayed wide, fur brushing moss, and beneath it, the rock shifted with a sound like grinding bone. A seam appeared where none should be, and slowly, without force, a gap opened wide enough for a man and a half to slip through sideways. Mara hesitated. Riverback did not. He vanished inside like a shadow. She followed. The air changed at once, thicker, weighted with damp and a stillness that vibrated low in her chest, like the echo of distant thunder. The light died after the first 20 steps, but Riverback didn't pause. He walked as if he could see with his bones. They passed under ceilings that curved like ribs, walls covered in lichen the color of old wounds. The path dipped, then narrowed. Mara ducked, her fingers tracing the stone. It was warm, not sun-warmed, but as if something alive had passed through here only hours ago, or never left at all. Then came the light, not from torches, from the walls. Paint, ancient, charcoal and ochre and blood-iron red. Murals that hadn't seen daylight in centuries. She stepped closer, her breath caught between awe and disbelief. Figures, dozens of them. Men and beasts. No, not beasts. Bigfoot, standing upright. Not looming, not snarling, standing beside people, sharing food, sharing fire, sharing space. She moved along the wall, heart thudding. Another mural, a circle of hands, 5 fingers and 4, human and not, interlaced. Another, a tall figure kneeling, its hands raised to the sky, surrounded by trees that bled red leaves. She turned to Riverback. He was kneeling, not to her, to the space, to the memory. The silence was holy. Further in, the cavern opened wide, a natural cathedral of stone and light. Shafts of it filtered through a crack in the ceiling 100 feet above, faint but golden. It illuminated the center of the chamber where bones lay, not scattered, not wild, but arranged. Burial mounds, dozens, some small, some massive, all untouched, all honored. Mara stepped forward, slower now. Each bone gleamed like ivory pulled from time. Not a scratch, not a tooth mark, no signs of violence. These weren't kills. They were farewells. She dropped to one knee beside the largest pile. A femur the size of her leg rested atop the mound, wrapped with brittle vines, feathers, and one carved piece of wood, weathered but still bearing the arc and 3-line mark. The same one Ruth had drawn. She swallowed hard. Riverback knelt beside her, head bowed, arms resting on his knees. He didn't speak, but something about the stillness felt louder than words. Then her eyes caught something else. Not natural. Not sacred, metal, just beyond the outer ring of the burials, half covered in moss. Mara rose and moved toward it, brushing back earth and decay with careful hands. A footprint, boot tread, large, recent. Her breath hitched. Beside it, ashes, cold, but not ancient. A fire had been lit here, not long ago. She turned sharply, eyes sweeping the ground. Her pulse raced. There, burned bark, scuffed stones, another boot print, and something else, scratched into the wall, barely visible. Letters. Her hand trembled as she traced them. C. Mercer. It wasn't old. It wasn't even dry. Kane had been here. Not last year, not last month, days ago. She stared at the wall until her vision blurred. Her sister had come this far too. She'd drawn the symbols, marked the path, studied the patterns. What had she seen here that someone wanted buried? Why had she died for it? And how much had Kane already known? She turned back to Riverback. He stood motionless at the edge of the burials, watching her. But his eyes weren't on her. They were fixed on the far wall. She followed his gaze. It took her breath. A mural, more intricate than the rest. A woman, human, long hair flowing, arms outstretched. Before her stood a figure, massive, furred, kneeling. Between them was a shared flame. Above it, the symbol, arc, and 3 lines glowed red in the pigment. But what chilled her wasn't the art, it was the face. The woman looked like Ruth. Too close, too precise. It couldn't be coincidence. Her hand found the front pocket of her jacket. The old photograph, the one taken 2 months before the fire. She pulled it out with shaking fingers, held it beside the wall. Same nose, same chin, same braid over the shoulder. Not exact, but damn close. And whoever painted it had done so generations ago. Mara's knees gave out. She sank to the ground, heart pounding in her ears. Riverback approached slowly, placing one hand against the base of the mural. He exhaled a low sound. Not a growl, almost a sigh. Then, from behind them, a sound. Low, not his, not hers, from deeper in the cave. A growl, wet, heavy, older than Riverback, angrier. She turned fast, a second pair of eyes. Not friendly, not familiar, red reflected in the dim. And then, it stepped out from behind a stone pillar, another one. But this one was broader, taller, its fur darker, and its face, no warmth, no humanity, just rage. Riverback placed himself between her and the figure, his arms wide, not in challenge, in protection. The newcomer snarled. The sound echoed through the chamber. Riverback didn't move. Mara stayed low, breath caught, eyes wide. The air grew still again, and in that tension, that frozen thread of breath and heat and history, a second breath joined theirs, another one, from the other side of the cave. More movement, more watching eyes. Not Kane's men, not Riverback's kind, something else. And Mara finally understood. The mountain held more than bones. It held secrets no one had permission to find, and someone had already gone too deep. The moment the second one stepped from the shadows, Mara felt her breath shorten. It wasn't just the size, though it towered even over Riverback. It was the way it moved. Controlled, cold, no hesitation in its steps. Its eyes didn't flick to her, didn't react to the carvings, the burials, the ancient murals she'd just uncovered. It moved like it belonged here, and like nothing else did. Including her. Riverback didn't posture. He didn't snarl back. He lowered himself slowly, dropping to one knee, head slightly bowed. Not in fear, not in submission, in ritual. The silence thickened. Then came the sound. From the dark behind the tall one, others emerged, not stomping, gliding. Their fur was darker than Riverback's, almost shadow black, but less matted, cleaner, thicker around the shoulders like natural armor. They moved together, not in line, but in unison. A shared breath. A pulse through the stone. There were 5, maybe 6 of them at first, and more beyond the edge of her vision. Their eyes glowed low like coal in the half-light. They didn't growl. They howled. A long, rising call. Not violent, not celebratory. Like a memory being pulled from the belly of the earth. It echoed once, then twice, bouncing off stone and bone, and Mara realized this was no ambush. It was a gathering. The figure at the center of them stepped forward. An elder. She could feel it before she saw it fully. Years in the stoop of the back, wisdom in the way the weight settled in its massive frame. Its fur was grayed at the chest, trailing into a long, thick stripe along the arms. Its hands hung loosely at its side, palms soft and wide like bark smoothed by time. Mara didn't move. Her fingers hovered near the knife strapped under her coat, but she didn't draw it. She understood, in some unspoken way, that the blade wouldn't matter here. The elder's gaze swept past her, then landed on Riverback. There was no anger, no accusation. Just the slow, deep weight of disappointment. Riverback didn't lift his head. Then 2 others stepped forward, taller than the rest, arms longer, faces sharper. One of them broke the circle, moved toward Mara. She held her ground, even as it reached out and gripped her wrist. Its grip wasn't cruel. It was ceremonial. The way you seize a trespasser, not to hurt them, but to judge them. She was pulled forward, not yanked, but ushered, her boots slipping slightly against the damp rock. Riverback rose with a sound low in his throat, but he didn't stop them. He didn't call out, because he knew this wasn't his decision anymore. They brought her into the center of the stone hall, beneath the largest mural, where the woman stood with her hand extended, where Riverback's kind knelt in circle. She stood at the very spot that had once marked an old alliance. And now, she was the outsider again. The elder stepped forward and looked at the blood on her jacket. Riverback's blood. It was fresh, dark, soaked into the fibers of Ruth's old coat. The elder reached out and touched it, not with aggression, but reverence. 2 wide fingers pressed over the stain, and then gently slid upward until they rested against Mara's shoulder. She flinched, but didn't pull away. A murmur passed through the clan. Not words, not noise. Vibration, as if the whole chamber was filled with the tension of a choice not yet made. Then the elder pulled its hand back, looked to Riverback. Riverback stepped forward, slowly, his eyes lowered again. And then, he knelt fully, pressing both hands to the ground, forehead bowed. A gesture so vulnerable it made Mara's chest ache. There was no pride in it, no power, just a desperate plea. The elder stepped around Mara and placed its hand on Riverback's head. A moment passed, then another. The room didn't breathe. Then, finally, the elder turned back toward Mara, raised its fingers, pressed one against its chest, then pointed toward her heart. Not a threat, a ritual. She didn't understand the motion fully, but she responded. Slowly, she lifted her hand, pressed it to her heart. The elder reached forward. 2 fingers, dipped them into the blood on the coat again, then drew a mark on her forehead. It was the same curved arc with 3 diagonal slashes, the mark of the mountain, of protection and judgment. The younger members stirred uneasily. One of the dark-furred giants let out a frustrated snort, stepped forward, but the elder held up one massive hand, and everything froze again. Whatever the ritual was, it had been accepted. For now, Riverback rose slowly, moving beside Mara again, but kept his eyes lowered. She could feel his breath coming faster now, not from exertion, but from the weight of shame. He had broken something once, or someone had. And now they were here to witness the cost of it. The elder turned, and as the clan began to part, making way toward deeper tunnels beyond, the wind shifted again, not natural wind. From behind them, from the far end of the cavern, a distant thud, stone against stone, and then the shriek of metal. Riverback spun. So did Mara, and she saw it. The flicker of artificial light through the rock. Then the bark of a voice. "Target acquired, move!" Kane's men had found another entrance. They were in the caves. The elder stepped back, arms wide, voice rising in a guttural, commanding bellow that shook the mural wall. The clan moved fast now, forming a semicircle, their bodies protective, predatory, unified. Riverback stepped in front of Mara without hesitation, but she didn't stay behind him. She moved beside him. She didn't know what she was doing. She only knew she was done being dragged. The first flashbang hit the ground with a metallic ping, and then the cave lit up like lightning. White-hot, sound exploded. Mara dropped, hands over her ears. Riverback roared. When the noise cleared, the dust was everywhere. Chaos, echoes, lights sweeping. The humans had breached the sanctuary, and the war that had been delayed for decades was beginning again, one breath at a time, right in front of her. The walls screamed first, not in sound, but in light. Flashlights slicing through sacred dark, footsteps stomping over bone and history like it meant nothing. The chamber that had once whispered with breath and memory now rang with the steel-toed language of command. The humans were inside. Not lost, not searching, advancing. Mara's ears were still ringing from the blast, but her eyes caught everything. The movement of rifles, the way Riverback's body tensed beside her, how the clan closed ranks without speaking. They moved like a single animal with many hearts, arms flanking, shoulders squared. But even in their mass, she could see it. This wasn't a fight they wanted. Kane stepped into the light last. He walked like he always had. Slow, straight-backed, the storm outside forgotten, the air down here bending around him like a man who knew this moment was always coming. His parka was half-zipped, snowmelt drying on his collar. His left glove was missing. In its place, the hand carried a long steel spike, not a weapon, a tether. His eyes found her first, then Riverback, then the elder. Kane stopped 5 feet from the clan's front line. He didn't draw. He didn't raise his voice. "Beautiful place," he said. "Shame it's been wasted on lies." The elder stepped forward, unarmed but taller than anyone else in the room. The silence around him wasn't passive. It was controlled. Authority, not anger. He raised one arm. Open palm. Kane tilted his head. "That a threat?" Riverback growled low beside Mara. Not deep, just enough to say enough. Kane's gaze shifted to him and held. "You never learned, did you?" he said, quieter now. "You can't protect both sides." He lifted the spike in his hand and pointed it like a needle toward Mara. She was never yours to save. Mara didn't move, but her hand dropped to the knife hidden under her jacket. Her back touched Riverback's forearm. He didn't look at her, but she felt him shift slightly, ready to shield, to bear the hit. Then the elder roared. It wasn't a war cry. It was command. The sound blasted off the cavern walls like thunder. Everyone froze. The human soldiers raised their rifles but held fire. Kane's face didn't flinch. The elder stepped forward again and pointed to the mark on Mara's forehead. The blood-drawn sigil, still fresh. Then he pointed to Riverback, then to the chamber, then to Kane. There was no word for it. But the meaning was written in air. She is marked. He is claimed. This place remembers. Kane looked around, slow and steady. He studied the murals. the graves, the way even the stone seemed to lean away from his voice. And for one moment, just one, Mara thought he might back down. He didn't. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small device. Radio. No bigger than his palm. He clicked it once. Static. Then a voice. Confirmed second sighting near Southern Gorge. Package B secured. Copy. Kane smiled. Copy. He looked at Mara again. You think this one's the only thing they've got? He asked. This mountain's full of sins, and they've been hiding them long enough. Behind him, one of the soldiers stepped forward, holding a net launcher. Not raised, just ready. Riverback bared his teeth. Mara's heart pounded. Kane took another step. You think he's the only one who crossed the line? He's not, but he'll be the first to pay for it. The elder growled, louder now. Two of the younger clan members spread to flank Kane's men. Tension thickened. Then Kane snapped his fingers, and chaos broke. The net launcher fired. The mesh spread wide, but it didn't reach its mark. One of the dark-furred Bigfoots intercepted it mid-air, tearing it apart with a snarl. The soldier shouted, stumbled back, and Riverback lunged. Not toward Kane, toward the soldier behind him. His massive body crashed through the group, sending two men sprawling. Lights flared, voices screamed. Gunfire erupted. 2 shots, not aimed well. One hit the wall. The other grazed Riverback's shoulder. He grunted but didn't stop. Grabbed the barrel of the rifle, bent it backward, shoved the man hard against the rock. Kane didn't shoot. He didn't run. He watched. And then he moved. Not toward Riverback, toward Mara. She saw it too late. By the time she turned, he was already on her, hand gripping the front of her coat, dragging her back. The knife slipped from her fingers, clattered to the stone. She screamed, kicked, but Kane was strong, too strong. Riverback turned, saw her, and something broke inside him. He howled, raw and ragged, and charged. Kane didn't flinch. He spun her around, arm locked around her neck, holding her between himself and the charging beast. Take another step, he barked, and she dies. Riverback froze. So did the others. The chamber fell into a death hush. Kane's breath was hot against Mara's ear. I told you, he whispered. This mountain marks what it wants, but it doesn't get to keep it. Mara's voice was hoarse. You killed her! Kane didn't respond, so she said it louder. You killed Ruth. He stiffened. Then she laughed, a sharp, broken sound. You were never trying to protect anything. You were trying to bury what she found. Kane's hand tightened. She was going to tell, Mara gasped. She saw the truth. And you. Kane slammed her forward, toward the wall, hand pressing her cheek against the old mural. You think you understand this place? He hissed. You think any of this is sacred? It's rot. It's a disease, and it needs to be cut out before it spreads. Riverback stepped forward. Kane turned toward him, knife now in hand, pressed against Mara's ribs. Then Mara whispered just loud enough for Riverback to hear. Let the fire come, and Riverback understood. His eyes shifted, just slightly, to the torch, the one Mara had lit hours ago when they first entered. It sat by the edge of the chamber, still flickering, burning low. Mara twisted. Kane reacted, but too late. She rammed her elbow into his gut, spun, grabbed the torch, and hurled it toward the dry moss that hung from the center beam. The fire took instantly. It roared upward. The heat kissed the ceiling. Kane shouted. The soldiers turned. The clan retreated into the shadows. Riverback grabbed Mara, pulled her away from Kane's reach. The stone trembled beneath them. A groan deep in the earth. The ceiling cracked. Mara heard Kane's voice behind them, cursing, scrambling, ordering retreat. But the stone wasn't listening anymore. It collapsed in chunks. Dust swallowed the light. Riverback wrapped his arms around Mara and sprinted toward the inner tunnel, just before the back wall fell. When the dust settled, Kane was gone. Maybe crushed, maybe not, but sealed, buried. The air was thick, hot, choking. They didn't stop until they were deep underground, where the air cooled again, and the fire was only a memory behind them. Mara leaned against the stone, gasping, her hands shaking. Riverback touched her forehead gently. Not to check the mark, to comfort. She looked at him and whispered, "There's no balance anymore." And from deep in the tunnels ahead, something echoed back. Not footsteps, not a voice, a cry. And this one wasn't human. Mara came to beneath the weight of silence. Not the silence of fear or stillness, but the deep, settling quiet that follows collapse. The kind that stretches after loss, after fire, after everything you believed would hold has broken. She was lying half-curled against a smooth stone wall, throat raw, arms trembling from ash and smoke. The roof hadn't taken her. Not fully. Somewhere behind her, a wall had given out and diverted the cave-in just enough. The rest was darkness and dust. Riverback was beside her, barely breathing. His chest rose and fell in shallow waves. Ribs heaving, one arm tucked beneath her, the other sprawled across the dirt. He had shielded her again, taken the brunt of the fall. She didn't know how long they'd been there. The air smelled of old stone and dying fire. Mara sat up slowly, palms scraping against rock. Her whole body ached, but not in panic. It was a dull ache. Familiar. Alive. She pressed a hand to Riverback's chest, searching for his pulse. Not because she doubted it, but because she needed to feel it again. Still there, still strong beneath the layers of fur and scar and memory. "Hey," she whispered, voice hoarse. "We're not done yet." He stirred. Not much, but his eyes opened, slow and heavy, like someone waking into a world they weren't sure they wanted to return to. The stone above them creaked, but no one came. Not Kane, not soldiers, no more lights, no more gunfire. Just the mountain again, old and watching. Mara stood, staggered once, found her footing. The air was cooler here, fresher. That meant something. There was another way out. She turned, eyes scanning the far wall. It wasn't a tunnel so much as a split. Narrow, barely wide enough to pass through, but dry. The dust moved inward, not out. Air was pulling through. She turned to Riverback. "We move now," she said, crouching beside him. He growled softly, more pain than protest, but nodded. Together they rose. Slow, wordless. His arm draped over her shoulder, hers wrapped around his waist. They walked like survivors. Each step paid for, earned. The stone passage wound like a scar through the mountain's belly, marked by no torch, no tool, no sign of man. But it wasn't empty. Along the walls, faint markings began to appear, carvings older than charcoal, etched into the rock itself. The same symbol again and again. The arc, the 3 lines. Then variations, hands reaching, trees uprooted, stars circling a mountain's peak. As if the mountain had always known this would happen. As if it had waited for them to pass through. Hours might have passed. Or minutes. Time no longer ticked in seconds. It moved in heartbeats and footsteps and the strain of breathing in a space meant for memory. And then light, not from fire. Daylight, pale, gray-blue. The kind of light that only comes at the edge of spring. A promise, not a warmth. The passage opened not into a clearing, not into forest, but into a ledge, a high ridge, and beyond it, the valley, endless and wild. Snow still clung to the shaded crests, but down below, green had begun to creep back. Pines stood tall and unburned. Water glinted far in the distance, threading like silver through the folds of earth. And there, barely visible, was a line of old fencing, broken in spots, half swallowed by moss. Just beyond it, a circle of upright posts, research markers, flags, signs of the human world, signs that people were coming. Riverback dropped to his knees at the edge of the ledge, not from weakness, from something else, something deeper. He placed one hand on the ground. Then, with the other, he reached toward her, not to grasp, to offer. He pressed his open palm to his chest, then touched his heart, then reached out. Mara didn't hesitate. She mirrored him, hand to her own chest, then her heart, then to his hand. They met palm to palm, fur to skin, heat to heat. No words, no oath. But it was understood. A vow. Behind them, another shape emerged from the shadows. One of the younger Bigfoot from the howling ones, its chest still marked with old ash. It came forward slowly, watching, cautious. Then another followed. A second. A third. The elder did not appear, but the young ones gathered. They saw Riverback. They saw Mara. And without warning, one by one, they pressed their palms to their chests, then to the dirt. The gesture returned. Recognition, inclusion, not as kin, as witness. Mara's legs shook, but she stood taller. A breeze pushed through the trees behind them. Cold, but soft. She looked down the ridge again, eyes scanning past the line of flags. She could see it now. Vehicles. White. Governmental. Not army, not private contractors. Something older. Universities. Conservationists. People who didn't know what they were stepping into. She turned to Riverback. "You said nothing," she whispered. "And yet you told me everything." He blinked slow, steady. The others parted, revealing a path. Not carved, not forced. Grown. A way down into the deeper woods. Into the places man had not mapped. Mara took one last breath, then reached into her jacket pocket. Her fingers found it. A small silver pin. Ruth's. It had come loose in the fall. She stared at it for a moment. Then, without speaking, she stepped to the edge of the ridge, knelt down, and buried it beneath a flat stone. Not to forget, to honor. Behind her, Riverback let out a low sound. Gentle, melodic, like wind passing through hollow wood. She turned to him. "I'm not going back," she said. "If they're coming, they'll need someone who's walked through the fire. Who knows what's real?" Riverback stepped forward, placing one massive hand over the stone she had just placed, then looked to the woods. Mara followed his gaze. There, between the trees, a narrow opening. Faint. Overgrown. But it waited. And not just for them, for all that would come next. She felt her pulse steady. Her hands stopped shaking, and when she finally spoke, her voice didn't break. "If the forest has chosen me," she said, "I won't run anymore. Show me the way." Riverback turned without a sound, and together, they vanished into the green that never forgot. Sometimes the wild doesn't just hold silence. It holds truth. And not the kind carved in stone or written in books, but the kind that waits quietly in the spaces we're taught to fear. That truth lives in the broken places, in what we run from, in what we don't understand. It lives in the gap between who we are and who we once were, and if we listen long enough, we might hear it speak, not in words, but in wind, in earth, in the breath of something ancient still watching. There are laws out there older than any courtroom. They aren't enforced with guns or badges or chains, but with balance, with memory, with a silence that punishes arrogance and rewards humility. Some say there's no justice in the wild, but maybe they're just looking in the wrong direction, because in the wilderness, mercy isn't a weakness, it's survival. Kindness isn't weakness, it's legacy. And when we trespass too far, it's not the monsters that punish us. It's the mountain itself. But sometimes, if we're quiet enough, if we kneel when we should fight, and listen when we want to speak, we earn something more than survival. We earn a second chance. Not to forget what we did, but to choose who we become next. The forest doesn't ask for explanations. It only asks if you're willing to carry the mark and live in a way that makes peace louder than fear. Thank you for walking with us through this story. If it stirred something in you, if it made you feel seen, haunted, softened, or strong, please share your thoughts below. Let us know what stayed with you. Your words keep these stories alive. And if you'd like to be part of more journeys like this, subscribe, follow along, and help us build a community rooted in compassion, wonder, and the power of stories that whisper long after the final word. We'll see you in the next chapter.